Welcome once again. I am Alan Benson. AAI is pleased to host this legislative summit, which offers an opportunity to hear from leadership in the Kentucky General Assembly regarding what was proposed, what became law, and what did not become law. At AAI, we refer to this as the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, many of you all know that AAI is a policy initiative that was organized in 2010, featuring a wide array of primarily African-American stakeholders, leaders, and operatives that come together to discuss and address the issues that confront the African-American community. It draws input from across Kentucky and the nation, and it is co-convened by a multitude of organizations that support this common objective. This legislative summit will offer you a unique, unvarnished perspective of some of the inner workings of the legislature and a considered view from those that were in the middle of the action. Perhaps we will gain a peek into future policy efforts in the Kentucky legislative arena. We are also pleased that we are continuing this collaborative partnership with AARP of Kentucky and WLOU Radio, who is simulcasting this event at 1350 on your dial, as we stream as well on Facebook Live. At this time, I will introduce to you our moderator, Senator Gerald Neal, who will introduce the panelists. Senator Neal.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you so very much, and welcome to the African American Initiative. Once again, we have the opportunity to share with you information that I think you will find useful, and also information that will be develop a more basis for insight going forward. And that's what we strive to do. This is a policy initiative. This is a policy piece. And guess what? The legislature, that's exactly what we do there. We do policy. So this is an exciting opportunity to get a wrap up on what happened in the recently completed legislative summit. Legislative summits or what? So we have great panelists here because we have the cream of the crop here. We have Senator Morgan McGarvey. He's the Senate Democratic floor leader. He represents the 19th district here in Louisville. We have House Democratic floor leader Joni Jenkins. She represents District 44 here in Louisville as well. And we have my good friend Reginald Thomas, the Senate Democratic Caucus leader, and he represents the District 13 in Lexington. And my good friend Derrick Graham, he's a House Democratic Caucus leader, and he represents District 57 in Frankfort. So these are our leaders. These are my leaders. These are the leaders of those who take policy forward, particularly from the perspective of the Democratic Party, but also from the standpoint of many other constituencies for which we represent. So I want to say hello to everybody. I'm going to ask everybody to come off of mute because we're going to just jump into this thing. There's so much to talk about. We're not going to follow the usual format that we usually employ in this situation. We all know each other. We're going to share. So you just jump in and be mean to me like you do sometimes when, when I go left, you're ready to go right. Okay, that's all good. So let me just tell you, I'm going to start off with this. I'm going to ask each of you all to respond. I want you to know, I'm going to start with Senator McGarvey. I'm going to go to Joni Jenkins. I'm going to go to Reginald Thomas. I'm going to go to Derrick Graham in that order if we can. I want you to give just an overview, quick overview of what your feelings are about the just completed legislative session. What do you feel about it, Senator McGarvey?
Ooh, kicking me off with that one. Glad we're not starting a hard question here, Gerald. No, this was a busy session. So the way we do sessions, you either have a 60-day session or a 30-day session. This was a 30-day session, and 30-day sessions are always kind of crazy. This one was particularly busy because we were doing the budget. We had the American Rescue Plan come at the end. We had all the legislation coming up, the dynamics between the legislature and the governor, the middle of a pandemic, a lot of stuff going on. And so I was talking with Joni earlier today, in fact, and I told her, I said, this reminds me of the TV show The Wire. I don't know if anybody ever watched The Wire. There's a great character on there, Stringer Bell. And he talked about how he wanted more 40-degree days because when things are really cold, people are crazy. And when things are really hot, people are crazy. He needed some more 40-degree days. we had no 40-degree days as the legislature this year. It was all peaks or all valleys. And so I felt like there were days where we really did some good things. And I think we were able to help some people and have our voices heard in a way that people didn't anticipate before the session. And then, man, there were some days where I felt like we were absolutely getting kicked in the face. And so it was a fight going in, and some of those fights, because of numbers, we weren't able to win, even if I thought we scored more points. So that's just my overall view. I don't want to take more time before we hear from Representative Jenkins and Senator Thompson, Representative Graham.
And I might as well tell you all the protocol is I'm going to be really nice to you the first time around, and the rest of the time we're just going to go first name. Okay, can we agree on that? Okay, so
Perfect.
Representative Joni Jenkins.
Thank you, my senator. I agree with everything that Leader McGarvey said, Morgan. We talked every day, and it was a very, very fast, very, very hard working 30 working days. Much of it was in the beginning was overshadowed by the majority party's what I thought was a power grab and an overreach to take the governor's executive powers. And throughout the session, we played ping pong with the governor's duties, and we gave some to the attorney general and some to the treasurer. And so that was very, very concerning, because we're setting precedents when we do that. But also there's a whole lot of things that are ended up in court. So we're waiting for those to wind through. And then, the federal money became known late in the session, and the last day, while we passed a very austere budget, which gave nobody any raises, did not fund textbooks, we spent $1 billion in the last 45 minutes of the session using federal money to do what I think were some pretty good things. But it was a little breathtaking for us to end up that way.
Okay, well, Senator Reginald Thomas, your impressions.
Yeah, and first thing I got to say, Gerald, you say I'm your leader, but I always want to tell people in Louisville, you are my mentor.
There you go.
A step in the right direction. That's how I would characterize this session. In fact, that's my lead sentence in the legislative update that I just sent out to my constituents. A step in the right direction. In every session, it's always a mixed bag. There's some things you don't like. I think Representative Jenkins, said it best when she said initially there was this power grab by the Republicans to try to take away power from the executive. And there's some other things that were pushed out, like Senate Bill 5, like Senate I think it was Senate Bill 228 that wanted to remove from the governor's right to appoint vacancies in the U.S. Senate. But there was more to like, in my opinion, about this session. In terms of really looking into the 2020s and going toward the 2030s that I did like. I really like the movement toward full day kindergarten.
We're going to get into some of that subject matter. I just want that impression.
Right. Yeah. I'll let you the moderator here, but I would just say that I would summarize this session by saying a step in the right direction.
Okay. And for those who don't know, the first two individuals, Senator McGarvey and Representative Jenkins, are the leaders. They're the leaders of the Democratic Party in the respective bodies. Senator McGarvey, obviously, in the Senate, and Representative Jenkins in the House of Representatives. So Senator Reginald Thomas and my next guests are caucus leaders. And what they do is they herd us like cats. In other words, they organize us to make sure that the train arrives on time, that information is there, that the discussion, the interaction between us takes place, and they set it up so that the leaders can run with it when they're doing their particular piece, which leaves me with the last individual that's going to be here tonight, with the last but not the least, my very good friend, Representative Derrick Graham.
Thank you, Senator Neal.
Your impression.
They asked me the very last night of the session, LRC asked for a grade in terms of us. They were just recording the leaders. I don't know if the other leaders were ever asked the question
about how I thought and what I thought of the 2021 General Assembly. And I told him, I said, I'm gonna use my old education, my profession as an educator, and I'm gonna give it a C- or a D+. And I say that because, and we'll talk about it, is obviously the institution is going in the wrong way, I believe, because the governor has always been, particularly, and we'll get into the discussion of the power grab that Representative Jenkins talked about earlier, what they did, and I'm almost certain, and I'm not a lawyer, but that the courts will see some of the power grab that was taken will be illegal. But the one thing that I think that no one has talked about is the limit on the open records, where people will not have access to information that happens inside the institution of the General Assembly.
Well, hold that point, because I want you to get into detail on that when we get back to that point, if you will. But go ahead, your impression.
And my impression was that it was a what the other leaders have talked about. The power grab, I think, is the second thing that concerns me because of the way in which it was done and how it was done. But I think down the stretch, us coming to an agreement, particularly with the American Rescue Plan and the funding of those things that we talked about, which we'll get into, the broadband, coming back and at least funding for 1 year, the kindergarten program. But I'm concerned about the attack on education, which has happened, which we'll talk about, because public education is the key, as I used to say, is the key that opens the door to opportunity. And I think this General Assembly has taken that key away. And we'll get into those discussions, but those are my impressions of the General Assembly.
Well, let me tell you, this is going to be a good exchange, because I see two different poles operating, and I see the leaders being very careful about how they're leading here. They're being clear about where they are, but we don't quite know where they land yet. So this is going to be really interesting going forward. Why don't we start with a discussion regarding the budget? I mean, as you know, the most important policy document that we undertake in any legislative session is the budget, how we deal with the money, because every time we assign money to something, we're actually fueling and driving the policy that money's assigned to. So I'm gonna mix it up just a little bit. I'm gonna start with I'm gonna start with Joni. And I'm gonna ask Joni, what was the best thing that you think happened in that budget? Just name one. And the worst thing that you think happened in that budget?
Oh gosh. I'm trying to think, I'll do my yearly or bi-yearly. This was odd to do a budget in the 30 days. We usually do them in the 60-day session, but because of the pandemic, we only did 1 year back in 20. So we had to come do the second year in the 30-day session. So it needed 60 votes. It needed a supermajority to pass. And I always say that our budget is our moral document, because it shows where we put our treasure in. And the thing, I'm trying to think of the best thing while I'm talking, but one thing that I did not agree with was putting so much money in the rainy day fund. We put
explain that.
We have a fund that is there for emergencies, and it should be well funded. And I am in favor of well funding it, but we put money in it that brought it to $1.2 billion. I may be off on that a little bit, but it was over $1 billion. And if things aren't raining in Kentucky right now, I don't know when they will be. And I was very disappointed that we did not follow the governor's budget, because I thought he had a responsive and responsible budget. And there was money in there for small business. There was money in there for nonprofits. There was money designated for individuals that were having really lots of problems collecting their eligible unemployment insurance benefits. And there was money to start correcting, modernizing our unemployment insurance system. So I was disappointed that we did not do that. I was disappointed that we were underfunding education in this, that we did not increase the SEEK formula. We did not give increases to our teachers who, my goodness, from the beginning of this COVID just turned on a dime to provide non-traditional online education to all of our public school children throughout.
Now,
So
see,
that was
Joni, I said one bad thing, and you just did three. Now,
I'm
say something
sorry.
good. What good happened in the budget? No, don't be sorry. This is good stuff you sharing. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I can't think of anything good.
Okay, all right, that's fair enough. Fair enough. So I'm gonna go to Morgan. And Morgan, what's the worst thing that you think in the budget? The worst one thing maybe, and the best thing that you think.
I don't think you're going to see a lot of disagreement with the people on this call in terms of best and worst. We'll just be able to name a few more of them. And Joni's right. This is our moral document. We can talk all day long about what we value. If we don't put our money behind it in the budget, then it's just words. And so I think the worst thing about the budget is, like Joni said, it's the things we didn't fund. You know, this was an opportunity. Kentucky was at a crossroads. We were in the middle of a pandemic. We know that people need help, and we had some ability to do that through the rainy day fund, through other programs. The governor laid out that roadmap to help people who are struggling, businesses who are struggling. I'm particularly aggrieved by the fact that we haven't helped out the nonprofits. These are groups that have been working so hard to keep our heads above water, much less managing their own, and just need a little bit of help. And guess what? We're not helping them on the policy side either, because programming alone cannot undo what we're doing with our policies and frameworks. If I had to go one thing, I'd go with all the things Joni mentioned. I would particularly point out the lack of relief to the nonprofits. There are some good things in the budget, though. And basically, I think it's important for people to understand. Joni talked about the fact that it was rare for us to do a budget. That's really important. This is a one-year budget. But what was also interesting about this process is we basically did two budgets. And Joni, you mentioned that earlier, you talked about how much money we spent on the last day. So you say, what's the best thing about this budget? Congressman Yarmouth and President Joe Biden is the best thing about this budget. Because the American Rescue Plan came in and gave $2.5 billion to help the people who are struggling, the businesses who are struggling, the infrastructure, which is needing in Kentucky, getting people connected to internet. The federal government came in and did what we were not doing for the people in this state. And the good thing is we were actually able to come together, Democrats and Republicans, urban, rural legislators, and pass some of those much needed projects and relief in the last days of the session. But it wasn't in our budget. It was because of the federal money that came in from President Biden and Congressman Yarmouth, who really and truly, that bill has his name on it. It came out of his committee as the chairman of the House Budget Committee.
Okay, so Derrick.
Yeah.
I heard you loud and clear. You're not happy with this session.
No.
What is it about this budget?
Well,
the worst thing,
I think
I'm gonna take a gamble that you're gonna find something good that happened in that budget.
Well, I'll say this to be on the positive side, starting off. I do think that the money that was appropriated for the first year of kindergarten, that's a positive thing, because early childhood education and kindergarten investments, you know from research that those are two of the most important things that we can invest in to help increase educational opportunities and success.
That was $140 million, by the way.
$140 million, but that's only for 1 year.
Oh,
so we'll
1 year.
Because we have to come back next year for the next budget.
So we shall see.
So we shall see. And I think part of that was going to the negative aspect of what we did was the $25 million tax credit that will go to private and parochial schools and religious schools, which will take money away from increasing education opportunities for our public schools. And I represent in Franklin County, we have two school systems. We have a independent district and we have the county schools. And so what we've done is also allowed schools to pick and choose who they want to come to their schools. And the county schools, for example, which are bigger and can provide, opportunities more so than what the smaller school districts, the independent school districts, although our district is thriving. And we have as our superintendent, a gentleman who worked in the Jefferson County School Administration, who's now the superintendent for us, and that's Houston Barber, who grew up and was raised here in Franklin County and went to the independent school district. And he has increased in enrollment. But from the overall standpoint, there will be recruitment in athletics as well as academics for schools trying to get the best and the brightest. So we're going to see problems not only with the tax credits, but with schools and students shopping for where they want to go, whether it's academic or athletic. I think that hurts the 42 independent districts that exist across the Commonwealth. The good thing about it is that we've invested broadband, and we're expanding broadband. As
what does that
Senator
mean?
McGarvey.
What does that mean for us to do that?
That means that opportunities that some schools, particularly in the rural parts of the state and far west and far eastern Kentucky, they will have, or if the broadband is extended, that they could have better internet systems in place. And we have found out since this pandemic how important that is, how more important it is because of students not being able to attend school physically in the building. And as you know, in Jefferson County, most of the schools have gone back, but they're still on a rotating basis of where they're still using the internet system. So that would help in terms of opportunity. But no question about it, as a former teacher, kids have to be in the building as well. You can do it remotely, but they also need that physical element of being in the building and working with teachers. All of those things, I think, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and I guess we'll get into those further discussions, but that's my take on what has happened for the 2021 session.
You know, and I'll remind our viewing and listening audience that school districts are different. They have different challenges. For instance, Jefferson County School District is the largest in the state. It's humongous compared with any other school district in the state. So the ability to do different things are different. So we may hear different responses as to what this budget means to these school districts. We'll see. But I've saved my friend Reggie for the end because he struck a positive note. And I want to hear this. You're going to want to hear this, Reggie.
Well, Gerald,
the worst thing in this budget now, stick with the budget, and the best thing.
Well, Gerald, you're right. I am the optimist in this group, but my remarks will be brief because I couldn't agree with Derrick Moore in his comment. I couldn't agree with Derrick Moore in what he said because I was going to say the same. The best thing in this budget was the allocation of $140 million toward all-day kindergarten. And let me tell you why that's going to continue. We talk about the $2.5 billion that that Kentucky received from the American Rescue Plan. But what we don't talk about enough is that there's another $2.4 billion that's been set aside just for education. So we're going to get almost the same amount of money that's geared just toward education. And we're going to use that money to also help fund education coming forward. So all-day kindergarten is going to be here in Kentucky to stay. And to Derrick's point, and obviously Derrick and I think alike about education. We may have a different lens toward this session, but we both agree about the importance of education. The worst thing was that $25 million tax credit. That's the worst thing we did.
Explain that situation there.
Well, what that does is this, for all your listeners, if you owe, let's say you owe $1,000 in taxes, I'm gonna try to keep it simple, okay? Rather than paying $1,000 in taxes, you can pay $1,000 towards your favorite school, whether it be private or public or whatever. You can pay $1,000 to that school. So now that money doesn't go to our state coffers, that goes to that school. And that $1,000 can be used to provide scholarships or financial aid to a student, okay? So we're taking money away from our state government, most of which goes toward education. That's our #1 budget priority. We spend more money on education than we do any other single line item, okay? And so therefore, that's going to hurt the amount that we can give towards schools. And Derrick is absolutely right. what you're going to see with this $25 million, really it's $125 million over 5 years. Let's just be honest about it. $125 million, okay, go towards schools that are going to start cherry picking students. You know, they're going to give scholarships to the best students, the brightest, those who they think will help make them look good. And as my floor leader, Morgan McGarvey, has pointed out on the Senate floor, these have no discriminatory policies. So that means that they can decide we don't want you because of, well, they can't do it because of race, but they can decide we don't want to do it for any reason that they choose. Could be your background, could be problems you had with the law, could be a whole host of things. But they can cherry pick students for any basis whatsoever, compared to public schools that they have to take any student who comes through the door. And so you're going to see a lot of schools suffer because of the scholarship tax credit. That's why I agree with Derrick. The best thing, $140 million to an all-day kindergarten, because we've got to get to early child education. Education is the key to success in our society. The $25 million per year over 5 years for tax credits, the worst thing we did.
Well, I got to tell you, I cannot disagree with anything I've heard. I think all of these things are important, what each of you have raised, but I'm gonna raise a little bitty thing in that budget that just tickled me to my innards. It's small in the scope of things, but it really got me. Do you realize that ever since the inception of the African American Historical Commission, it has not been funded? This has been for years and years and years. Well, let me tell you, we finally got some money in the budget for the African American Heritage Commission. And why is that important? That's important because they do the work of projecting, organizing, extracting, sharing information that historically has been dismissed, discredited, overlooked. And that's very important, particularly to those of us in the African American Initiative in terms of doing this. So that little thing there is, I think, is a good thing. But there's one other thing, and I'm going to ask Morgan to speak to it. Senate Bill 270. Tell us about it. You sponsored Senate Bill 270, and I had the fortune of co-sponsoring it with you, but you gave leadership to this. Tell us about Senate Bill 270.
Well, it's a team effort, as you know, Gerald, the two of us working together, and of course for Joni and Derrick for helping us get it through the House. We very much appreciate it. And got to give some credit to Robert Stivers, the Senate President as well, who helped us with that one. This is a great deal, I think, for Simmons College, which is Kentucky's oldest HBCU. And it does a couple of things for Simmons College. Number one, it allows Simmons College to have an accredited teacher program. So we know that of college graduates, only 3% of college graduates come from HBCUs. 50% of Black teachers come from HBCUs. And Simmons College didn't have an accredited teachers program. Now they can apply for one and they can get it under the law we passed. And I think that could be a major draw, and it could be an incubator for leadership. And as Reggie just said, education is the key to success. If we have more Black teachers in the classroom who can relate to our students, who bring that lens of equity and those shared experiences, I think it's going to be an awesome thing. But it goes on. And it also made Simmons College eligible to get the Kentucky tuition grant money. And that money is going to be able to go in with the students there, which I think will enable more students to be able to attend Simmons College, which, everybody on this program probably knows it. But some people don't know, you can't be an HBCU unless you're in existence before 1964. So you can't just go on and create HBCUs anywhere you want to. And I think this could be a really awesome thing for Louisville to have a strong HBCU in our city. And you look at so many of the cities across the country that have a strong HBCU and what it does for that country, what it does for that city. So we're doing that. We're getting KTG money in there. And then, of course, we're creating a partnership between Kentucky State and Simmons College. And one of the things we've seen under the Obama administration and under the Trump administration, both, we've seen an increase in federal funding for HBCUs. I think that's going to continue to be even more now that President Biden is in. And of course, our Vice President Harris, is a graduate of an HBCU. This
Howard
partnership,
University.
that's right, this partnership between Simmons College and Kentucky State, our other HBCU, is going to open us up for even more federal money, which I think will be coming in. And so a great thing for Kentucky. And we have so many awesome graduates already of our HBCUs. Reggie Thomas's parents met at an HBCU and are graduates of Kentucky State. So, you know, we've got so many things to build on. I think this is one of those bills where, you know, Gerald, you just said sometimes it seems like a little thing. None of these things might seem so big in totality, but I'm hoping that if the five of us get together 15, 20 years from now, we can look back and say, you know, that's a seed we planted that really grew into something special.
Boy, you really giving me hope. I tell you, let me tell you something. I'm going to come back to Joni on voting, but before we get there, I got to raise up Derrick and Reggie on this HBCU piece, because Reggie teaches at one of those HBCUs, Kentucky State, right? And then Derrick attended. Am I right?
That's exactly right.
At Kentucky State.
Why are you saying, am I right? You know that I did.
So we can cheer together on that one, fellas, right?
Yes.
Because guess what?
Yeah.
Although we can cheer about Kentucky State, here comes Simmons roaring down the road, coming on strong. And then, I mean, you just got to be excited about that. You know,
well,
it's got great leadership, it got great aspiration, and now it's getting the tools that it needs to go to the next level. I think it's just fantastic.
Well, what I think is fantastic too is that Kentucky State University supported the effort. And so, you know, and for your listeners, for many years in terms of the budget, Kentucky State was not funded properly in terms of matching funds that the federal government requires between the state government and the money that comes from the federal government. And so now I think the leaders of the Senate particularly and in the House understand that if you don't provide that funding for the university, then you're losing money for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, because that money comes into our state. And so that's the good portion of that. And now with Simmons now having that official recognition, that's additional money that also will be allowed into the Commonwealth. So it's a win-win situation for both universities. And I'm glad that our university, that's on the Hill, as we call it, worked closely with them in terms of supporting this effort. So,
Reggie?
Oh, I think it's definitely big for the state of Kentucky. I mean, to bring Simmons into the fold and provide them with a teacher education program where they can now recruit, train, and provide teachers to Jefferson County Public Schools and districts beyond is tremendous. It's a win for Kentucky State University because now, you know, they have an inroad to attract students, you know, from Louisville, even more so, and get them to come to Kentucky State and again from surrounding areas. So it strengthens both colleges, and again, it just helps support education throughout the state. And you talk about Derrick, but I want to, and Morgan mentioned my mom, but show y'all what a small world is. My mother was in school at Kentucky State the same time Derrick's mother was in school at Kentucky State. Derrick's mother is also a graduate of Kentucky State. His mother, Dottie, and my mother, Wanda, were good friends at Kentucky State. And that's how I got to know Derrick growing up.
So folks that don't understand the importance of a Kentucky State, an HBCU, that don't understand the importance of a Simmons college that has an urban mission, but actually has a statewide projection and beyond, quite frankly, what you're talking about is muscling up. Because think about it, for a number of these individuals, a lot of African Americans, I mean, if you get into the percentages and the numbers of doctors, lawyers, and candlestick makers, you're going to find that it was HBCUs that produce these individuals in the face of tremendous odds. I'll just sum it up: racism and the barriers that were constructed all along the way. But now we're seeing some breath of fresh air and some light. So I'm going to have to switch over here a little bit because I got to tell you, Joni, I got to tell you, this voting thing all over the country. How many states was it? 43? I forget what the number was.
43. It's
Led
43.
by the Republican Party, have put in voter suppression laws by commentators from across the country, most notably in Georgia, et cetera. But then Kentucky steps up. I'm trying to figure out what happened in Kentucky, Joni. Give us some insight. Is it good, bad, or is it ugly?
Well, I think it's good. I think it could have been better, but I think it's good. As you said, we saw all over the country Republican-controlled legislatures enacting laws around voting that were, blatantly trying to suppress the vote. The most recent one that has gotten a lot of attention is Georgia. So we had Secretary of State Michael Adams, a Republican, who came together during the pandemic with our Democratic governor, Andy Beshear, and set the rules for how our election was going to go last year during the pandemic. And we saw weeks of early voting. We saw a state portal where folks could go and request their absentee ballot. It was very, very user friendly. We saw a lot of people voting by mail. We saw a lot of people voting early. And there were some people who wanted to vote on election day. So they all had those choices. My caucus, the House Democrats, put together a very extensive agenda and filed bills to keep in place what we had during the pandemic. It didn't go that far, but we do have 3 days of early voting, the Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, which is so important, before Election Day. We have a statewide portal that is user-friendly, and folks can go to that portal and request an absentee ballot. We wanted it to be a no-excuse absentee ballot, but it's not. But it's pretty liberal in the excuses you can give. And we can have voting centers that were so popular. Here in Louisville, we saw the fairgrounds being utilized, and many, many people went to the fairgrounds to vote either early or on Election Day. So I think, in an era where we saw a lot of bad things happening around the country, here in a Republican-controlled legislature, we did move forward a bit.
So anybody jump in. Something's got to be bad in there somewhere.
Well, here's what I heard from my county clerk, Senator. The regional centers, he had no problems with it, but no additional money is going to help the county clerks if they set up the regional centers, as well as have, here in Franklin County, we have like 48 precincts. So his argument was, all right, if we set up the regional centers, they have two things, and I don't know if Jefferson County or Fayette County has this same problem, is finding poll workers to work on Election Day. And then if you have the regional centers, then you have to find additional poll workers. I like the regional centers because if you're on one side of town, you can go vote at that regional center. If you are on the other side of town, you can vote there. Whereas you have to go to that precinct where you are registered and where you live. So I think that's an opportunity. I just think in terms of the layout of this and the funding of this for the county clerks, it's a question that he had to me, but he supports it. It's just how will it be funded and how, if they will have the money to do those things. I think we came out on this better than expected, because I was expecting the exact same things that have happened, particularly throughout the Deep South. I wish we had stayed with the 5-day. I believe we had the 5-day rather than the 3-day. So we cut it by 2, but it's still better than what I expected. And so I'm glad we have what we have based on the fact of what we're seeing across the country. But we have to look at this from the standpoint, we're 8% of the population in the Commonwealth of Kentucky when you're speaking of people who have African-American descent, and maybe 3% in terms of Hispanic voters. And in those states where they are trying to cut back on voting, it's because of the higher percentage of people of color within those states.
See, I was getting ready to go there. Why? why in Kentucky like this, Morgan? Why? I think he just opened the door.
No, he opened the door. I'm glad it's open because it needs to be said. Look, I'm glad we have more options for voting. So Kentucky was one of the most restrictive states in the country. We're not much better, but we're better. So let's celebrate being better. But let's face it, Donald Trump got 62% of the vote. Mitch McConnell got 58% of the vote. They got a record number of votes. Had it been different, we wouldn't be seeing these changes in Kentucky. And even the changes we're seeing, let's keep in mind that we didn't even go so far as to make permanent the changes that worked and people liked in the 2020 election. You should be able to get your mail-in ballot. Just vote by mail. You should be able to do it. It's 2022. We can keep it secure. You should be able to vote 2 or 3 weeks before an election, even if you don't have a reason or excuse just because you want to go vote. You should be able to do that. Voting should be easy. And this is real simple. If you want people to do something, make it easier. If you don't want people to do something,
make it harder,
right? And so even though look, our laws are better, I mean, Kentucky, you could vote for one day from 6 to 6, and anybody who works and has kids or anything else going on in life knows that can be hard. So we're doing better, and I'm glad about that. But as Derrick said, we didn't see what happened in Georgia and Kentucky, and we don't look like Georgia in Kentucky. And so I think what you saw based on the Republican registrations the last 5 to 10 years and how much more they've registered than the Democrats, they saw the changes that were made in 2020 because of the pandemic in a bipartisan way. And then they saw it benefit them in the 2020 elections. We talked about the top of the ticket. Let's talk about the fact that both of our chambers lost seats in the legislative chambers with those changes of allowing more voting. So, I mean, look, I'm glad. I'm a Democrat, which means I'm for people voting. No matter what the outcome of the election is, I'm for people voting, which is why, in light of what happened, Democrats getting their clocks cleaned in Kentucky in the 2020 elections, I wanted to make those changes permanent. They went a little bit of the way, and I think that we are right to be somewhat cynical and critical, even though it's still a good thing.
Well, it sounds like Joni was right in her characterization of this to me. It sounds like she was right, but there's a background behind this, and there's a reality behind it as well. Very good. We're going to take a question from a WLOU listener. I'm going to ask Ron Jones to come on, our facilitator there from WLOU. Ron, welcome. And what's the question from your listener?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Good evening. I am a grandmother raising a special needs student.
It's hard to hear you now.
Good evening. I'm a grandmother raising a special needs student. How will the school choice bill affect me in being able to look at a different school for my special needs grandson? Could this negatively affect funding for special needs programs?
So he's asking the question, Morgan, I think it was raised generally. So whoever, go ahead, jump in.
Go ahead, Reggie.
Yeah. Let me take that first, Gerald, because as I pointed out, I'm generally optimistic. I wish I could be more optimistic in answering her question, but again, these schools can discriminate, and so therefore, if they decide they don't want to take children with disabilities or special needs children, they can do that. My answer to her is I would like to see what the results are from now, because the scholarship tax program is only for 5 years, and see how many of these schools take children with disabilities. My hypothesis is they won't take very many. They won't take very many at all. I would like to be fooled on that. I hope I'm wrong. I really hope I'm wrong, but I just don't see these scholarship tax credits benefiting her or her special needs child. That's my answer.
Does anyone have a different opinion?
Well, no, I agree with the senator, Senator Thomas. If you look at
also known as Reggie.
Yeah, also known as Reggie. But as an educator and one who had kids in private school and public schools, most private schools and parochial schools and other religious schools, they focus on getting those students whose, number one, parents can pay, number two, who are the best and the brightest. And they don't cater to a lot of kids who have learning disabilities.
Yeah.
And when you've come across those schools that do, They are the exception to the rule. And so if you don't have a trained teacher or an educator in that room, if your child has disabilities, then they're going to be at a greater disadvantage because the guidelines that the state provides does not apply to those who are in the private education system. And so you don't make those accommodations that fit the needs of that student unless you do have a program in place at that private school, of which most private schools don't go down that road. There are some, but very few go down that road. So that's the issue that you will be dealing with, is the individual or individuals who are working in that education system, that private education system, are they qualified to teach kids who have learning disabilities? Have they been trained to that extent to where they know how to address the needs of those students? That's the problem you're going to face, because the guidelines will be different between the public and the private sector.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. So we're going to move on here. No knock warrants. No knock warrants. Come on. We have been going through, you put the adjective on there, whatever it is. We've been going through it ever since we can remember. The last 25 years of the last century, as part of drug interdiction strategy, as part of this war on drugs, this no-knock warrant piece has been raised up as a tool where they could go in and not announce themselves and just bust into somebody's home. You know, what I got to tell you, the home is probably the last place you got on earth, at least theoretically, that is your bastion, is your castle, is your place. But they had these no-knock warrants. We know that no-knock warrants have a trail of blood behind them throughout their application. And guess what? It includes some white folks too, but disproportionately folks of color. So here we come to a situation where the Breonna Taylor killing, a no-knock warrant again. And boy, was a lot wrong with what they did. And I think, well, no thinking about it, it raised all kinds of ire among people. We know that the Metro Council, the mayor stepped in and said, we're changing policy right now. You're gonna have cameras and you're gonna have, no, we're not gonna do this no-knock stuff. The Metro Council came in, put that into law and said, hey, we're gonna, no more no-knock warrants. We're not gonna do this. You're gonna have to have those body cameras so we can see what you're doing. And that helps you and the officer, which was good thinking. And then, of course, we know all that ends at the border. Right there, when you step out of Jefferson County, now you step into the rest of the state, and boy, guess what? No-knock warrants are still there. So Representative Scott filed a bill in the House. I filed a bill later in the Senate, and neither one of those got called. However, the Senate president not stepped up there with him, thinking we're going to ban totally no-knock warrants, and was, I got to tell you, somewhat dismayed because I didn't see that coming with respect to that, and was not really satisfied. But then I took a harder look at this Senate Bill 4. Senate Bill 4, I think, I'm going to get ahead of you all on this one. Look, I think Senate Bill 4 has some redeeming value. And I want to talk about that value versus the no-knock warrant efforts that were initiated by Senator Scott and myself. What is so good about it? First of all, somebody describe the Senate Bill 4 as it relates to no-knock warrants. Who wants to take that?
Gerald, I'm about to take you out of the moderator's seat because and turn the question on you. I mean, you were in the thick of all of this and truly one of the leaders in the General Assembly on this. I mean, so you're asking us as the moderator, but you might be the most qualified to answer.
Well, let me tell you, that's very cute. That was very nice. But I'm gonna turn this over to the co-sponsor of Senate Bill 4, and his name is Reggie Thomas.
Yes, Gerald.
Go ahead. What?
First of all,
Look. Let's not talk about what it started out to be.
Sorry.
What is it now? What is Senate Bill 4?
Well, first of all, I'm going to agree with Morgan though that you were one of the leaders in this effort, and although it didn't go as far as your bill, you were in the middle of this. So I compliment you on getting something done. And let me begin by saying this, and I said this on the Senate floor: Kentucky had to do something. All of the eyes of the nation were upon us. And as we've seen with the scrutiny on the George Floyd, people expected something us to do something here in Kentucky to make sure that we don't have another tragedy like Breonna Taylor, because that was a very somber and very frustrating and very sad time here in Kentucky to have to go through what we went through with regard to all the machinations and disappointments and frustrations, following her death. Here's what Senate Bill 4 does. I'll try to hit the highlights. One, it doesn't totally eliminate no-knock warrants, but what it does say is this: you can only have a no-knock warrant in situations where you have a terrorist activity take place, or a violent offense take place, or we have a hostage situation take place. It's got to be something life-threatening to engage in a no-knock warrant. Secondly, you can only do it during the hours of 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. No more can someone come into your house at 12:30 at night like they did the Breonna Taylor situation and just burst into your house when you have the highest expectation of privacy. That's when you have the highest expectations late at night that no one's going to come into your house. And when that happens, of course, bad things can happen. Bullets start flying, people die like Breonna Taylor. Thirdly, when you do it, you got to have a body camera, or if you're in a situation where in some of the rural counties where you don't have body cameras, the no-knock warrant has to be on an audio recording device. And then fourth and finally, has to be done by someone with special expertise like a SWAT team, or if you don't have that, you got to get approval by a judge or a magistrate to use other officers that have some expertise beyond just regular training. So there are a lot of safeguards in place here now, so that we will not see another situation like we did, back in February of 2020 with Breonna Taylor.
But Reggie, we still got no-knock warrants. Why is this better than what it was before this legislation was passed? Explain that.
Okay, Jordan, I'm glad you asked me that, because I will explain that. I have always been of the opinion that an outright ban on no-knock warrants is bad policy, because there are life-threatening situations where you can justify a no-knock warrant. You can justify a no-knock warrant in a terrorist situation. I mean, you're not going to knock on a door and say police, where you've got engaging in just discriminatory death practices. You're not going to do a no-knock warrant when you got a hostage situation where where the loss of life is at a high risk. So there are situations where I can certainly justify uses of no-knock warrants. Okay, so I think an outright ban is bad policy.
So why not limit it to those things? In fact, that was part of the discussion.
Well, I think
they still left the door open. They still left the door open as to look. Granted, it was narrowed. I think that's no question about it. Granted, it was a step or two forward. I think there's no question about that. And I do agree with you. There are circumstances where folks got to go in, but with the law already permits it under what they call exigent circumstances. You pretty much have a situation like that anyway. But my point is that the reason I like this is because it tightens it up. It has more accountability in it. It brings more scrutiny to the process. I agree with that. But I'm going to tell you, I still have some worriness about it. I think it's a step forward. I still have worriness about how far we went. I want somebody to push back on me. Push back. Somebody else besides Reggie, because I know he's ready to get me. So somebody else, push back.
Well, I would add two things that got added in the House on the last day, and that was that emergency medical has to be on standby if you're going to execute one of these warrants. And the folks that are executing these warrants have to have insignia on their body so that you know that they are police officers. So those are two things that were added in late negotiations over in the House.
Well, I agree with that too. I think those are positive.
And I will just, I felt really uncomfortable with how the process of how this bill unfolded. I think at this historical moment, it would have been so meaningful to have a woman legislator, a woman of color, to carry the bill. So I think we missed a historic moment that I think would have had a healing effect on folks had Representative Scott been able to pass her bill. We could have negotiated and had some changes, but to have her name attached to it, I think would have been a great measure of healing within our community.
And I agree with that. And that's one of the reasons I withheld my bill to the very end when it was clear that it wasn't going to see the light of day, neither one of them. But I didn't want to make that statement. But I see, as you can see, I'm a little ambivalent about this Senate Bill 4. I do think it's a step forward. I do think, however, we need to revisit this in the future and look at it a little more. That's my thought anyway.
If I could add a footnote, Joe, I think you and Joni are both right. We're all seasoned legislators.
How did that happen?
I don't know.
Well, and all of us know that you may not get the whole pie the first time. You may not even get half the pie the first time. You might only get a slice. That's
I taught you that, Reggie.
I
told you that story.
You taught me that. You're my mentor.
Half a loaf is better than none.
That's right.
And to Joni's point, there is nothing wrong with a woman of color coming, because there's a lot to like in Attica's bill. There's a lot to like. And I would have voted for Attica's bill. Let me be clear. I would have voted for Attica's bill.
I supported that bill, but I supported mine. Mine was a little stronger.
Right. So I hope now that we've made improvements, as I said, now that we've taken a step in the right direction, I hope Attica comes back and files her bill in 2022, and we got more time. We've got 60 days to take a look at this and have more negotiation discussion. So in my mind, the door is just as wide open for Attica to come forward and bring her bill in 22 as it was in 21.
I think the door is closed. I think they just put a nail in it, and I think it's over. I'm just telling you. And I think that was part of the strategy for the good, the bad, the ugly wrapped into one. And I think that's where we are. That doesn't stop us from filing bills, because we do that all the time, right? Even if they pass or don't pass, to make a statement. But I think it's done.
Senator Neal, if I could interject here, I think one thing that maybe we all should be focusing on in upcoming sessions are at the very basic of what happened in the Breonna Taylor case is a failed war on drugs. Mm-hmm. And I would love to see us look at our statutes around drug policy, because I don't think it's working. And I think it's making people more unsafe than if we didn't have some of these laws. And I think there is systemic racism that is attached to our drug policy in Kentucky. So I'd really like to see us look at that as we go forward. We know that while they had a no-knock warrant in hand, they did knock, they did announce themselves. But I think at the very basic, when we start looking at what all went wrong in the Breonna Taylor case, it started with failed drug policy.
So I think you hit it right on the head. I think all our colleagues would agree on that. And we're going to have to turn our attention to the broader foundation of the problem. Mm-hmm. I think you're exactly right. And there's another thing we got to be careful about too. Being reactive to the situation that obviously is true, the circumstances that the protests are all about. We got to understand that protest actually is about much, much more.
Much more. Yeah.
Much more.
I agree.
We shouldn't lose sight of that. So there's a lot to do. So our WLOU listeners are going to be leaving us if they haven't already shortly, but we still have a little bit to go. So I want to raise a question. Hey, the Civilian Review Board, which is back in this area, same thing, came out of the protest and so forth. But the Metro Council again, well, let me just say, the mayor puts together a group of people, they come together, they make a recommendation to the Metro Council. Metro Council picks it up under the leadership of McCraney, Metro Councilwoman McCraney, Paula McCraney, who did a tremendous job with respect to that. She fought. I want to tell you, you should have heard her when she wasn't on camera. I mean, she was fighting. I mean, all the way for this thing, because she knew that unless you had subpoena power that was independent, in other words, you had to have some independent arbiter, or you had to have someone other than those that had control of the political piece. She knew that it could render it less effective. Doesn't make it totally ineffective, but much less effective, and undermines credibility. Morgan, I'm going to shoot to you on this a little bit, because you did some work in this area that I think is very notable, and you should explain that.
Yeah, well, we worked a lot on this. I think this would have been one of the most important reforms we could have done, particularly for building that trust and accountability between the community and the police department. And it's important to know for people to know what we were working on. This was a limited bill. This was directed just at the city of Louisville, although my friend Reggie had an amendment filed that could have gotten it directed toward Lexington as well. This was directed towards Louisville. And what we're dealing with is Louisville created a civilian review board to oversee the police. And it passed 25-1. As part of this legislation, again, sponsored by Councilwoman Paula McCraney, they created the Office of Inspector General, who could investigate. Now, this doesn't mean that they could fire police officers. This doesn't mean that they could go in and actually make these sweeping changes. They could only make recommendations. But to make the recommendations necessary on personnel, on training, on policy of our police department, they need to make sure that they have access to all of the information in a particular instance. The only way you can do that is if you have subpoena power. Now, just for anybody listening, subpoena is one of those really big fancy words that only means you can get what you ask for, right? If you subpoena something, you can get it because you asked for it. And if you don't get it, then you can go to a court and the court can make them give it to you. That's basically what we're talking about here. And so we wanted the Inspector General himself or herself to have subpoena power. Whoever the Inspector General is going to be, I don't think we know who the Inspector General in Louisville is yet. We know who's on the Civilian Review Board. I don't think they've named the Inspector General. So whoever this Inspector General is going to be, that they have subpoena power once they've initiated an investigation into a policy or a personnel matter with the Louisville Police Department. Well, we got pushback. And we heard from our friends across the aisle who have super majorities in both of our chambers that no, an elected official had to oversee this process. So we worked with Councilwoman McCraney, we worked with the business community, we worked with activists, we worked with people who are involved in law enforcement, and came up with the idea, why don't we have a circuit court judge ultimately decide whether a subpoena can be issued? Judges are familiar with these subpoenas, they're familiar with the process, they know it, there'll be some check and balance on it, and then once that subpoena is issued, the Inspector General can go and get the information. That approach actually passed the committee in the Senate 8-3, but then got stalled. And that's when this other bill came forward. And this bill that said, no, we're not going to let a circuit court judge get involved. We didn't mean that elected official. We meant we want a Metro Council committee to control the subpoena power. And by the way, we don't want to give it to the Inspector General at all. The Inspector General has to come to the Metro Council, ask if they can get a subpoena. Then if a subpoena is issued, it's the Metro Council that issues the subpoena. And then the Metro Council can only subpoena people who are already government employees. So think about that. If you're conducting an investigation, you can't get surveillance camera footage. You can't get witness statements. You can't get cell phone records of witnesses or people who might have seen something. Think about what we even saw in Louisville with what happened with David McAtee, the surveillance camera and the cell phone cameras that didn't belong to people who were government employees. Those couldn't have been gotten as part of the investigation. And also, once the Metro Council got this information that they got from their subpoena, they didn't have to give it to the Inspector General. The ordinance itself says that government employees shall be compelled to talk to the Inspector General and the Civilian Review Board as part of this process. The Metro Council already has subpoena power for government employees, and there's nothing that prevents the Inspector General from going to the Metro Council and asking for the Metro Council to issue a subpoena. So this bill, I think what they were trying to do is say we're granting subpoena power, but in fact, nothing was actually being granted at all. And then when the Inspector General wasn't able to get the information that he or she needs, I think the public would be confused because say, wait a second, I thought you said that he had subpoena power. She had subpoena power. That's not how it worked. So we came up with a compromise at the very last minute because I do think it's important to get some type of subpoena power for the Inspector General that would have put the Metro Council still over it, but would have put the Inspector General in the driver's seat. So once the Metro Council said, yes, you can issue a subpoena, then that subpoena comes out from the Inspector General. The Inspector General gets all the information that's produced as a result of the subpoena, doesn't just apply to government employees. And that way you could have more of a thorough and meaningful investigation. I thought that compromise was going to go through. It didn't at the last minute. And we have already started working towards next year, truly getting meaningful subpoena power for this Inspector General, because that's something that our community needs. As Leader Jenkins mentioned, the healing process, we do need to have that trust and accountability between our police department and the community that the police department is supposed to serve. And so hopefully that's something that we can get next year after we've had another year to work on it.
Well, let's talk about kids for a minute. There's some good things that happen and some bad things that happen. For instance, there was also a $2 child per day increase for the Child Care Assistance Program included in the final General Assembly budget. I thought that was a positive thing. What do you think?
I think we
Anybody?
found out during the pandemic how crucial and essential childcare is. When essential workers had to go to work, they had to have a place that was safe for their kids to be. It's an industry that has been suffering over the years. We have never funded it as adequately as we should. This was a step in the right direction for that. So that's, I'll give you that was a good thing in the budget. I should have said that earlier.
I finally got one. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, some other, and you all just piled in, but here's another good thing. Senate Bill 36, I would say, would allow juvenile court judges to use their discretion to transfer youth ages 14 and older to adult court for situations involving firearm. It was arbitrary. And no matter what the circumstances were, they just went to adult court, and adult court is not where the vast majority of our children need to be.
Mhm.
Anybody want to comment on that?
No, I think that's a good thing, development of the brain, and you want to talk about those things too, is that we know that young men's development of the brain takes a little bit longer than what it does with young females. And so actions that are taken at 14, 15, 16, they really are not mature enough mentally or sometimes physically to deal with those issues that you're talking about. And so giving those judges that discretion, I think that's a good thing. I really do. Some of these kids who get in trouble, and we've seen it, they stay in trouble. But a lot of kids who get in trouble, all they need is for an opportunity to see that someone cares about them and is taking an interest in them to help move them in a different direction. So I think that's a great thing. I think it's a great thing.
And we know past policies affected kids of lower income than children in higher income. So this is just another that, if your family could afford a good attorney, you probably weren't going to go up to adult court.
Right.
I think this was a good step. This was, I think, Senator Whitney Westerfield, who's done some really good work, I think, in juvenile justice.
Yeah, I think he had a good session.
Yeah.
If I can add a footnote to this, there's one thing that we didn't do that I think is the next step here. Part of Senator Westerfield's plan was to make sure that those children 12 and under who had engaged or were accused of engaging in delinquent behavior, didn't go out of an incarcerated period, that we would look for non-incarceration measures to deal with those 12-year-olds or older. And that did not pass. And I think we've got to come back now and say that if you're 12 years old and because of your circumstances or influences, you've done something that for adults might be criminalized, that we shouldn't put those children in cells or in blocks, that we should find alternative measures to deal with those 12 and 13-year-olds. And so I think we didn't do that this session. That did not pass, but I think that's the next step for us.
You know, as you all know, passing bills is a very difficult process. And it was made so on purpose because you have varying perspectives, ideas, experiences from across the state. And you got to go through a process, so to speak, so folks can get to some medium where they say, oh, that makes sense for us as a general policy, or maybe even just in a part of the state where it may impact. But you know, it's a very difficult process. But at the same time, what always I struggle with, I just wonder if you all struggle with it, is that some of our colleagues, first of all, we have some very bright colleagues, I have to say. People put down legislators and so forth, but I have to tell you, on balance, I've run into some of the sharpest human beings I've run into anywhere else in the country. I'm just going to tell you, that's my experience. However, that doesn't make all of us experts in everything we do.
Right.
And, you know, we go up there and we make final decisions, and it just varies the amount of knowledge we may have and coming to a conclusion in a given situation. And I raise that because of what Reggie just said. It's known, it's fact, it's understood that a 12-year-old does not have the mental capacity. In fact, you don't become an adult until late 20s and early 30s. I mean, okay, you got to have some responsibility in there. I understand that. But my goodness, it just, the information's there. And that raises this point. I have filed twice a bill dealing with race as it relates to how we put information before us to make decisions. We know, given our history, we got a racist history. You know, you can't deny that. We have racist structures in place that perpetuate those inequities that history produced. We have people who do not understand and will not accept the fact that they have been impacted. They have been through their cultural orientations and so forth, and can't take a step back to listen to another perspective of those perhaps look like me and some others on this piece, that maybe there's something in that. They won't even look at it. And yet we know the evidence is everywhere. It's obvious. Why is it do we resist putting more information before us before we do policy, like we do in fiscal matters? We do that in fiscal matters. Why is it that I want to get y'all's opinion, each of you. Why is it that we resist doing that when it's an issue of race?
I think it's the makeup of where you come from. And we've got a lot of colleagues who come from far east, far west, south central Kentucky, that they have either a very, very small population of people of color or no people of color at all. So what they do, they come reflecting who they are and where they come from, and not having that relationship with people outside of being white and not coming in contact with anyone. They can go through K through 12 without ever having someone in their class who is of color, particularly in certain parts of the state. And so when you are not exposed to other people and other cultures and other ideas, you think that everyone thinks like you because that's where you come from. And that's the problem that we have in Kentucky, is that a lot of our people who represent their constituents are not exposed to those varieties. But there are other things. Let me go to the other side of that. There are other things that connect us all, such as making a decent wage and having a good place to live and being able to provide for your family and helping to move, because all of us come from a culture that when your parents want you to do better than what they did, everybody wants it in their child. Whatever happened to me, I want you to do better. That's the American way. That's supposed to be the American way. And many people who live in far eastern Kentucky, they don't come out of their region. They stay there. Same way in far western Kentucky. And so they have this perception of people of color based upon what they've seen on television, on radio, in the music. That's their perception. And that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. And I think when you get legislators who are, and we all there trying to represent our region and represent our people, it's very difficult for people to look outside the box sometimes. I mean, I do that. I have to do that based on where I'm from and who I represent. But a lot of people don't want to do that. If they don't have to do it, they're not comfortable in doing it, they're not going to do it.
There's a lot packed into what you just said. I'd like to get Morgan's perspective on this. Because Morgan, you probably sit around some tables I don't sit around, and vice versa. I would just be interested in an unvarnished response to that question.
First thing I'm gonna do is agree with what Derrick said. The second thing I'm talking about is this is your racial impact statement bill, which has been around for several years, Gerald, and you know that I'm a big supporter of it and we need it. So why don't we have it? I think it forces a hard conversation for some people. It forces the reality that systemic racism is real and that it is perpetuated by people and by systems, and that those systems are not divine in nature. Those systems were man-made. And whether it was discrimination in housing, discrimination in education, discrimination in healthcare, discrimination in lending practices, discrimination in policing, discrimination in voting. This was a government saying it was okay to do these things to people because of the color of their skin. And that for a lot of the people who are passing these laws, that maybe they didn't get where they are today just because they worked hard. And that forces a hard conversation. Now it's a conversation that we must have. And it is information that we must look at. Because if we are truly going to reach that goal of a more perfect union, then we have to make this progress along the way. That means we must confront what has happened. That means we must accept our role in it, and we must work together to make it better moving forward. And that is not easy, because you know what? If there was a bill that we could just pass a bill and say, guess what? Systemic racism's over. I think we'd have pushed that button already. At least I hope we would have pushed that button already. But it's going to be a hard conversation in a lot of different areas to get the legislature to view policymaking through the lens of equity, which is so important.
Reggie, you're on mute.
Yes. And being a guy who sees the glass half full, let me just add to what Derrick and Morgan is saying, because as not surprisingly, I agree with them. But since we're talking about legislation, we've passed a bill that, being perfectly honest, I was for, then I was against.
Senate Bill 10.
It's Senate Bill 10. And now I'm for again because of what the governor has added to that bill. What Senate Bill does is form a legislative commission on race and equity to look at what laws we have on the books here in Kentucky and what those laws do to create systemic racism here in Kentucky that Morgan has talked about. Okay? And so that's an opportunity for us really to have these hard conversations of race. I mean, Morgan is just absolutely right. We have got to have those difficult conversations of race. And as you know, Joe, we had them in the Senate this time that we've never had before. I mean, just Senate Bill 10 by itself, you know, that took an hour and a half of discussion. Imagine that. I don't know, we've ever had an hour and a half of discussion on a bill, but we had that with Senate Bill 10. And we need to do more of that. And I will tell you, Gerald, this is a first for this discussion. But I hope when this commission is formed this summer, that we look at some things that we know are systemically impactful toward systemically racist here in the state. We got to look at the death penalty, okay, and have a hard conversation. But maybe it's time for us to seriously consider eliminating the death penalty. We've got to look at early child education that Derrick and I have talked about. Really, Derrick's talked about it for 20 years. I've talked about it for eight years. And if we want to make the achievement gap, which is very real and is always present, then we have to fund early child education.
So you're talking about the things that we've all been supporting and fighting for over all this period of time. Those are kind of different. What I'm talking about is one simple thing: getting more information before us. Why is that resisted? Now, Joni, if you give me just a little bit, because I want to save you for last, but I want to make sure. I know Morgan's pressed for time. Morgan, do you have, how much time you got?
We're at the witching hour at our house. We mentioned childcare somewhere earlier in this conversation.
Yeah.
I'm hearing things picking up, and that's why I was just reminding you of that. So, but no, I want to stay on for this
we don't have but 9 minutes left.
Okay, good.
Okay, Joni.
Yes, sir.
Answer that question. I know you have the answer. You always have an answer when I ask you. Come on.
I think people are afraid what the answer is going to be. If we have that information in front of us, we're going to have to deal with it. And in some districts, it's going to be politically hard to deal with it. There's this beautiful moment on the floor of the House on the last night when we were talking about Senate Bill 4, and a white Republican legislator said, everything was fine until 1962 when we took prayer out of the school. And my newest caucus member, Representative Pamela Stevenson, who is fabulous, just jumped right on that and said, no, things were not. And, he did not mean to be offensive.
Right.
He just never considered that viewpoint. And from what I understand is after the bill passed, he walked up to her and said, I need to talk to you. We need to talk about this. You need to educate me. So that was a beautiful moment for somebody that came from a very, very non-diverse part of the state who didn't see that. I'm hopeful that this commission will do something. I would love to see your bill pass, because I think, some years ago when we passed what I think was a really bad bill about gangs that really would impact brown and black, probably young males more than anybody else. We should have had that information in front of us so that we were making an informed decision. But when we have that information, you can't look away from it. So I think that's maybe what some people are afraid of.
Good example. Our time is winding down, and I couldn't let it wind down without going to something that I think very exciting has happened. And me and my colleague, Morgan, have been involved in this with Yvonne Smith and Nikki Lanier and the president of Senate Stivers and heck, I don't know, Morgan will probably pull some other names up, but this West End partnership, opportunity partnership, I probably got it wrong. We call it WEOP. I think I got it right. Where we're proposing that there be funds generated locally and by local government, private and public, and which will trigger funds from the state totaling at least $30 million as seed money to begin as a tool, or to add in as a tool, the ability to address home ownership stabilization. In other words, as the gentrification process, which we're in the middle of right now, is going to force people out that traditionally have lived in this instance, the West End. This has happened all across the country. What we're after is, how do we stabilize that? And then in addition, how do we develop economic development? Because you can't stay where you are. You have to develop. And develop is going to raise costs, and it's going to challenge people. So how do you do that? So we got together for almost 9 months. I got to tell you guys, this is one of the most satisfying processes I've engaged in about 30 plus years in the legislature with these individuals. No acrimony. I didn't detect trickery. I didn't detect agenda. Don't get me wrong. Everybody's got an agenda, but I didn't detect it. We put stuff right out there on the table. We dealt with it, and we came up with this idea. Yeah. And I'm gonna say it real simple, and I'm gonna turn it over to Morgan, that we can help do this if we do what? if we reimburse, at first we said if we cap, but then we ended up saying because of some technical issues, if we could reimburse for any increases in property valuations going up as of January 2021, which means we got a baseline, nobody can rush in and change that. It's not a gold rush, but it's people who have as their primary residence, that want to maintain their primary residence for 20 years. For 20 years. And guess what? Their heirs will get the same benefit during that period. That's on the housing side, and it's more complex than that. The opportunity is more complex. Then on the other side, we have economic development, creating this fund because it would be funds that would leverage the tax, the excess tax, the increased tax on the valuation, not the tax you have now, won't affect adversely the public school system, for instance, that money would come back in a recurring fashion, 80% of it directed just at the defined area, which is west of 9th Street and a little south of Algonquin Parkway, both to the rivers, defined area, areas that have been depressed significantly historically, areas that have been promised over and over again, and even the best laid schemes of mice and men didn't show up with the funds, so it ended up on the shelf. And to encourage and incentivize investment in that area with a target of making sure that those individuals that are in that district now would have the benefit of that support. We want to make sure that those who have invested will grow, and those who want to come in will have to abide by the plans that are generated by a board, 21-member voting board, 23, 2 of them don't vote, but 21 of them do. 9 of them come directly out of the neighborhoods, the 9 neighborhoods that make up that area with respect to that. That is, I'm gonna say it, black lead, because it's reflective of the demographics. And on top of that, a board that deals with what? It deals with this question of advisory. You know, people have a tendency to, oh, it's just advisory board. That doesn't mean, let me tell you, when you have a strong advisory board, which also comes out of those 9 neighborhoods, which does evaluation, recommendation, et cetera, you got some muscle going on. So you got this board, the governing board and the advisory board. Now, I don't know if I've said everything, because you can't say everything about this, because they are going to develop the plan. Not Gerald, Neal, not Morgan McGarvey, not Robert Stivers. It's going to be driven out of that district. But last piece I'm going to say, and I'm going to have Morgan shoot it at it. And that is that the expertise was built into this piece in terms of institutional representation, in terms of those things that, look, we're talking about millions and millions of dollars. Give the average person millions of dollars, you know, it raises a question. In fact, I had to go and find a finance guy to deal with millions and millions of dollars. So what I'm saying is we thought through this thing as best we could, and now we've passed it in the last minutes in the Kentucky legislature. We have a chance here, folks, if it's done right. Morgan.
And I just add a few little pieces. I mean, because Gerald, you just covered it. On that 21-member voting board, I think it's more, you said 9 are from the 9 neighborhoods, which is absolutely true. 3 are people who are just appointed by the governor, the mayor, and the Metro Council. And we've already been told by 2 of those people that they're going to appoint people from the neighborhood. So you've got a statutorily Black-led board with a majority of people living in that neighborhood, controlling how this money is spent to help the people and businesses of that neighborhood. And that is the goal put in the statute. It is to help the people and businesses of the West End, and that's the West End Opportunity Partnership. This board is really going to have a lot of say in what does that. And you're going to be able to get 80 cents of every additional dollar in tax revenue than what you receive in 2021 to be able to go in and help invest in a community that, let's face it, has not received the investment it deserves. When Brown Williamson was there, when you had so many of the plants in Rubbertown and so many other jobs. The tax monies weren't flowing back into the communities where those jobs were located. And this is a way to do that. Now, I'll stay on the front end. I'm not the biggest fan of TIFs in general, these tax increment financing districts. I'd love to see, quite honestly, the stronger government programs in that regard. But this is a good tool that took a lot of work to get through the legislature, and we're going to monitor it going forward because we've never tried anything like this. But it's important to state that it's a bold initiative that I think can go a long way to help.
Last thing, and even though we have an anti-gentrification component, which we just described about the reimbursement of those increases in payments on increased valuations, the fact of the matter is that it's going to take a city government and others to bring other anti-gentrification strategies to the table, because we got to fight that. That's real. And if we are successful, and I dare say that we will be successful. If we are successful, then it's a new day. Yeah. It's a new day. It's not the end. It's not a panacea, but it is a significant tool.
That's right. And I think, and Gerald, to your point, we took, and I mean, listening, right? Listening, just listening and listening for community-led, community-driven change without tearing apart the fabric of the neighborhood. And so it's so important to have those anti-gentrification and anti-displacement measures in there. And that's what we're watching.
And have new voices.
That's right.
We got to expand it. So you have new voices from the
grassroots. That's right. From the bottom
and
up.
Hopefully some of those new voices are young people.
Oh yeah, we built that in.
Well, that's mandated by the statute even. At least one of the neighborhood members has to be between the ages of 18 and 30. Although it's kind of amusing watching the debate on what qualified as a young person, but it has to be between 18 and 30.
So look, folks, let me just say this. I've enjoyed you all. I do want to say to my two floor leaders, not only do you command the respect across the board, you probably don't always see it. You know, we operate in a very tough environment, but the way you operate, I'll tell you, I have no second thoughts about your leadership, and I just wanted to let folks know that I'm proud to serve with you. And then my two caucus chairs here, let me tell you something. You're two of the finest individuals, intellectual, strong, committed individuals that are about doing the right thing, all of you. And I think that folks need to understand, and I think folks do understand, that there's really, really a value in the leadership you brought, and I commend you all. I also want to thank you for coming on this program. I want to thank you for taking the time. I gotta give a nod to Morgan a little bit because you saw his little girl come up. Let me tell you something. When they come up, they come up. They'll take the seat. That's the end of that. I like that.
That's the way it's supposed to be.
That's the way it's supposed to be. That's exactly right. So anyway, we'll be back at it the next day and the day after that, and next year and so forth and so on, God willing. Thank you so much for coming on the African American Initiative. I want to thank the AARP for their continuing support, and appreciate the simulcast collaboration with WLOU Radio. I want to thank them for that as well. And I want to thank our co-conveners. We have some 30 co-conveners from fraternities, sororities, nonprofits, you name it. It's just a long list of them. We normally put them up, but this time we wanted to put a lot of time on this particular piece. I want to thank them for their commitment and their long-term connection with this organization. That being said, God bless you all from AAI. Thank you, Alan Benson, for your great work, Brunhilde Williams for your great work in the technical area, and Ron Jones for coordinating with the radio station. God bless you all, and good evening.
God be with you. Thank you.
God be with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Have a good night.
Take care. Have a good evening.